Georgia, Germany, Belgium, Romania, Spain, Ukraine, UK, Kazakhstan, the Netherlands, Bangladesh, Africa and Canada, and the list goes on. So, let the man speak for himself now. So, presenting to you Mr. Kevin Brown. He will be speaking today on the role of mediators.
Good morning.
It's always difficult to follow Priyanka, to go after her. She speaks so eloquently, she has great stories, she speaks multiple languages. Now, this is going to shock some of you. I am not Bangladesh. In fact, I was born in Canada, and I started practicing about 30 years ago, older than some of you are. And back then, mediation really didn't exist. People didn't understand it, people didn't use it. I remember a mediator being sued for practicing law without a license. That's all changed now. Things have moved on. Mediation in Canada, United States, Germany, Australia, and other countries as well, England, has become mainstream. It's become the go-to method of resolving conflicts. In a lot of countries, over the last, since 2015, they've had what are called voluntary mediations, but there's a mandatory information session that the courts demand the parties go to. They pay a small amount of money, I think it's 40 euros, $50 US. And if they don't like it, they can leave. So Priyanka was talking about voluntary, and she was talking about mandatory, and you also were talking about neutrality and impartiality, and then my colleagues debated about something, about another issue, and then we talked about the courts. So you can see that there are a number of opinions in mediation. I agree with some of what Priyanka says. I have a different viewpoint on the neutrality and impartiality. I think as a mediator, we feel it's important to have good statistics, to keep our jobs, to make money, to show society that mediation works. And so I want the parties to settle. And because I have an interest in the outcome, I'm not neutral. I don't want this person to settle or this person to get more, but I want it to settle. So I have a different perspective. I don't think either one of us is wrong. It's just a different view of looking at the impartiality. I'm here to talk about the role of the mediator. Do you see that picture that's up there? What do you see? Sorry?
Florence Nightingale.
I'm sorry, say it a little bit louder.
A girl or a lady?
A girl or a lady? Okay, a young girl?
Younger.
Young girl, okay. Does anybody see an older woman?
And an old.
An old woman. Can anybody see both an old woman and a young girl? Okay, I'll be talking about this shortly as to why I have this picture up. My time, I think, is limited, so I won't talk about me anymore. But I will talk about something that has a great impact on what a mediator does. In every mediation, there's a form or version of negotiation. Now, there's really, in my opinion, two types of negotiation. There is distributive mediation, and then there's integrative. There is competitive, which is distributive, and then there's collaborative, which is what the mediator hopes to get people to. You'll see here, it talks about a competitive, distributive mediation or format. And you have a problem, you have a discussion about the problem, and you come up with a solution. I like to use a very simple example when I'm talking about this. And a friend of mine who's a baker, he bakes pies and different things. He brought a pie, a mango pie, over to our table, and there was 4 people at the table. So he cut the pie into 4 pieces, 1 for each person. Who thinks that that's equal? Who doesn't think it's equal? Who doesn't like putting their hand up? 4 people, 1 piece, equal size to each person. Is that fair? Is that equal? Yeah. I agree. It does sound like it's equal. And that's just dividing the pie up equally amongst the people. And that's distributed. Dividing and giving people what seems to be equal or fair. But when we start to look into that one simple example, there's 4 people. One of the people might be 90 years old and doesn't have much of an appetite. Another one could be 6 years old and hates pie. Another one might be allergic to the pie. And then a 4th person might absolutely love pie and want the whole thing. So with knowing this situation, is dividing the pie into 4 pieces fair?
Not fair.
It's not fair. It's equal, but it's not fair. And it might not be
The
just.
choice has to be given to the people who want to take what.
More than the choice given to them, they have to be able to find out what their interests are. What's underneath? Do you like it? Do you want it? Do you like apple pie better? Would you like to have something else? And when we start to look at those things, we start to recognize that there are other options than the simple division. Can you think of any other options? We could ask the baker to bake a different kind of pie. We could ask the baker if they have something else there that the 6-year-old would like. We could divide it up differently. We could have the baker bake more pies. So all sorts of other options or other possibilities are out there, but we need to know what the person's interests are first. So, let me just give you another definition there, or a very similar definition, but one in writing for you in front of you. The competitive or distributive is a one-time interaction where there's no relationship, nobody cares about staying friends or anything else, just dividing whatever the material is. And, you know, I'm using an example of a pie. It could be a corporation. It could be the family assets. It could be inheritance. It could be division of property. It could be anything. I just use the pie as a simple example. Whereas the collaborative, it's a win-win, and people value the relationship. They care about the relationship, so they're willing to accommodate or to collaborate. Priyanka mentioned accommodating, and I like to use an example, if I may steal on your topic. When I go to Canada to visit my mother, I live in Madrid now, but when I go to Canada to visit my mother, there's this restaurant that she likes. And because it reminds her that her and my dad, when my dad was alive, they used to go there all the time together. And she doesn't like to go alone, so when I go there, we always go to this restaurant. I don't really like the restaurant. But you know, what's more important? Lunch, the food, or my relationship with my mom? It's something that she wants, so that's what I do. I accommodate her every single time. No matter how much I'm tired of that food, it's not about the food, it's about the relationship. And when people start to do that, when they start to do that in negotiations, you get a very, very different response. Now you can over-accommodate. If you're always accommodating somebody, you start to feel like you're being used or abused because you never get anything back. You're always giving the whole time. So remember I showed you the first slide, or the second slide, where it was problem, and then the discussion, and then the solution. Here we look at it slightly differently. You take a look at the problem, and by asking questions, and shortly I will tell you the 8 best questions I have ever uncovered when it comes to mediation. So If I forget, remind me. I think I have a slide on it. But you need to find out the interests, the needs, what it is that the people want. And this is what the mediator's job is. This is the role of the mediator, to help the people go from their positions, what I want a $5,000 raise, to my needs, to what is the reasoning that I want that amount of money from my work. After they looked at the needs, they start looking at options before coming to a solution. It's really, excuse me, really easy for people to go directly from the problem to the solution. And sometimes that works. You know, if a friend of mine comes up to me and says, "Yeah, Kevin, my car's broken down," I'm not going to talk to him about his wants and his needs and his interests. I'm going to say, does it have gas? Does it have this? Have you checked this? Have you checked that? What's the problem? And we're solution oriented. When my wife comes home after a bad day at work, and I just take one look at her and I can tell that she's had a bad day at work, I don't start coming up with solutions. I don't tell her what to do. I don't tell her. I stop talking and I listen to her to find out what it is that's going on. I may ask some questions, but I will listen to find out, because she needs to be able to vent at this point. She needs to be able to talk. And if I start throwing in answers or solutions, she once said to me many years ago, "Kevin, I want you to fix the stove, the car, and the plumbing, not me." And that makes a lot of sense. That makes a whole. I see mostly women going, yeah. I'm going to write this down. Tell my husband, my boyfriend this exactly. So, just want to talk about negotiation there for a bit. Now I'm going to get more into the role of the mediator. And a mediator, I would say that over 80% of the work that I do is done before a mediation. Now, I do a lot of facilitative mediations between people, between workplace. I think it was mentioned earlier that I work with the United Nations as an ombudsman. So in my work there, it's people all over the world that are in conflict with their co-workers. So they can't resolve it themselves. They've tried to talk, but they either just don't have the communication skills, or the other person isn't willing to listen and is too angry and can't see the other side. And that's where mediators come in, to help bring them together to resolve their conflict. Not to fix it for them, but to help them resolve it through helping them to improve their communication skills. So 80% of my work is done before we even get to a mediation. And that's usually work as a conflict coach. Oh, that changed, but that's okay. Conflict coaching starts off with active listening. Active listening can be, looking at the person, nodding your head, leaning forward, paying attention to what they're saying, reframing what they've said, paraphrasing what they've said. Active listening is not sitting there in front of the person, listening to what they're saying, thinking, did I buy garlic for dinner? And we can all do that. We can all slip away, because it's human. It's nature. It's what people do. But you have to remember to bring yourself back. Remaining curious, asking questions of the person, digging deep, finding out, well, how did that happen? Tell me more about that. What happened after that? How did that make you feel? How did that impact you? Pay attention to the body language. If the person's sitting there just like this, what do you think they're telling you?
Obedient.
Obedient. Okay. What else?
I'm not interested.
Not interested. What else?
It's not important.
It's what?
It's not important.
It's not important. What else?
They're not willing to.
Cold. I'm cold. Very, yeah.
Not willing to share whatever.
Not willing to share. They're closed. Yeah.
Yes.
All of these are possibilities. Or don't be fooled by body language either. This is my comfortable position. I don't want to stand like this because my arms just feel, weird. I don't like standing like this because my arms get tired. If I stand like this the whole time, I get bored. So this is just a comfortable position for me to stand. So you have to watch your assumptions as well. Pay attention to body language. looking people in the eye. In Bangladesh culture, do you look the person that you respect in the eye or not when you're talking to them?
No?
It's common. Common in any place.
Yeah. It is common in a lot of cultures, but there's also cultures where looking the person in the eye is showing them disrespect. So all depends, depending upon the culture, body language can mean different things to different people. Be present, I mentioned that about listening, paying attention. Don't take what you hear personally. A lot of people, when they are clients, visitors, when they are venting, telling their story, they will tell you that, nobody listens to me. And, when somebody says that to me, I also think, well, I'm listening. At least one person is, but they're not meaning you necessarily. They're really talking about the rest of their life. Reflect on the emotions. That can be a difficult one. I have to admit, my female colleagues are better at this than most of my male colleagues. If somebody is crying in a mediation, my suggestion is deal with it. Don't ignore it. I mean, I've watched some guys, some male mediators, take the Kleenex and just kind of toss it over at the person that's crying. And I'm sitting there going, oh. Or turn to the other person and completely ignore the person that's crying. I mean, can you imagine if you're in a room and you're really emotional about something and you're being ignored? So you have to deal with the emotions. You have to address the emotions. Obviously, you're very upset right now. Is there something I can do right now? Would you like to take a break for a few minutes? And they'll let you know what they need. Using a shifting technique. Anybody know what that is? That one's a little more difficult. It's when you're in the present, let's say, and you want to shift or move the person to the past or the future. So an example, somebody tells me, for the last 6 months, it's been horrible working with this person. And then they go on for a long time telling you why it was horrible. So then I will ask, once I believe that they've vented enough, I'll ask them a question. So, you said for the last 6 months it's been horrible. They go, yes. How long have you worked with them? About 2 years. Okay. So tell me what it was like a year ago with working with this person. And then you'll start to get a different feel or a different flavor of what's going on. A shift, that's a shift to the past. The shift to the future is something a little bit different but similar. I ask people what they would like to get out of the mediation, what their hopes are, what their expectations are. And if we have the mediation today, how would you like your relationship with this person to be in 2 weeks from now? Or in 1 week from now? Or tomorrow? So they start to think about what a resolution looks like to them and how they can, that's the word I'm looking for, and how they can work together and collaborate. Any questions? So, conflict coach, I just want to wrap that up, that part of it up. Venting, as I've mentioned, that's when the person needs to tell their story. And before they can listen to the mediator, before they even can think about listening to the mediator, they need to get it off their chest. They need to say what they need to say. And they need to believe that somebody is listening to them. The reason, or one reason, somebody repeats the same story over and over and over again is because they believe they have not been heard. Communication skills, which is huge, just 2 words there, but it's huge. And that's everything from using I language instead of you language. Anybody in a conflict with somebody and the person is on one side of the table and doing, you know, that's not conducive to a very well-run conversation or dialogue or discussion. That's just going to get both sides even angrier. So when you say instead of, you really made, I'm going to tone the language down considerably because I've heard people say it with very harsh language. But when you bang on the table, you really make me angry and I hate coming to meetings with you. Versus, in meetings, when someone is banging on the table, I feel threatened or intimidated, and I'd like to work on a way that so that we don't have to go have this occur again. Saying the exact same thing, but two very different ways, and usually a party is more receptive to the second way. And we also talk about how to raise an issue, how to bring up an issue with somebody. I want to meet you tomorrow in my office at 10 o'clock. Be there. Isn't a really good way to invite somebody to a conversation. It's much better ones. Defining the issues. Mediators spend a lot of time helping the parties to understand what it is that they would like to have happen, what their needs are. And that's through all of the questions, which I'll give you the 8 questions. Is there 8? Yes, the 8 questions in a minute. Considering the where you spend a lot of time. And this goes right across. Really doesn't matter what type of field of mediation you're in, civil, criminal, community, family, all of the different areas, workplace. Looking at the person's interests plays a huge role, or else you just negotiate at the positional level, like the 2 donkeys at first pulling apart, very positional, I want food, versus, okay, we have to collaborate in order to finally eat. And there's a lot of people that don't get to the collaboration part, and they'd rather have everything or nothing. They'd rather suffer than make amends with the other person. Okay, the 8 questions that I want to share with you. What are your priorities? Well, these can be used in almost any situation. You can't use every single one of these in every situation. That's just verbal run-on. But you can use these types of questions in almost any situation. For example, this class. What were your priorities in coming here? When you heard some guy from Canada or Madrid was going to be here at training, what were your expectations? What assumptions did you make when Priyanka got up and started to speak with you? What concerns do you have taking 2 days off of your other life to come in and spend the time here? What hopes do you have for this course and the future of mediation? What are your beliefs or fears or values, and how do these play a role? Now, these are all questions that I use all the time. When I first started out as a mediator, it's just like when you first start out as a lawyer. You first start out and you're standing there with your first few clients, and you're the expert, and they don't know anything, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the conversation, you go blank. You don't know what to say, and you don't know what to do next, and you don't want to look like a fool. So I had these questions written down, and that I would use, and they have helped me throughout my entire career. You can also use these, obviously, in a conflict situation. Tell me about your perspective on the conflict. What happened that particular day? Now, that's a great one, because in my experience, usually when I'm going to do a mediation or I have conflicts between parties, I will meet privately with one person and then privately with the other person. So person A tells me the story about what happened that fateful day 2 years ago or whenever. Gives me all the details, fact by fact by fact. I meet with the next person privately, and they tell me the story. And I'm sitting there thinking, were they in the same room when this happened? I mean, their perspectives are so different, and they just don't get it. And that's why I was showing you that slide at the very beginning with the older woman and the younger girl. So What are your priorities? What's your perspective on this? What expectations do you have from this mediation that we're about to undergo? What assumptions do you think about the other person? Do you have any assumptions regarding the other person? What concerns you about meeting here today with this individual? What are your hopes for the end of this mediation and for next week? What are your beliefs or fears or value, and how do they have an impact on your future relationship with this person? So, when I tell people about different perspectives, oftentimes I get this kind of deer in the headlight. I'll look from people that it's clear they don't fully understand what I mean, or they don't fully believe that people can have different perspectives when they're both looking or seeing the same thing. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So, my question, there's two lines, A and B. Does line A go to C, or does line B go to C? So is it A to C or B to C? None. Okay. Oh, that's the third option. Very good. Sure, that's the third option. A to C, I heard somebody say. Who thinks A to C?
So from my perspective, yes,
Who thinks A to B? I'm going to ask the third question. Who doesn't like putting up their hand? Okay, different perspectives, different outlooks, and it all depends on how you see it. Am I moving around too much for you? What do you see there? What do you see on the screen? What?
A young girl.
A young girl. Oh, how do we get to that one? I'm sorry. I was going to say, no. That one.
Oh.
And if you can see a young girl there.
Yeah. See two faces.
You see two faces.
Yeah.
Okay, what else does anybody see?
A glass.
A glass? Like is in a crystal glass?
Wooden. Wooden glass.
A wooden glass. Okay, what else? Anything else? Can't hear you. Okay, do you see the two people? The two faces? In the sides of their faces? Most people look at the darkest object, but ignore the dark object and look at the white. If you look at the white, you'll see the nose, the mouth, and that, and the other one on the other side. Alternatively, you can see a vase or a wooden mug or a candle holder. Now here's one that they're both looking at the same thing from different angles. One of my colleagues mentioned earlier. So that's the whole reason for that, was just to show you how everybody can have different perspectives. Just in this room alone, there was a variety of different perspectives. The only one I'm going to not take into consideration is the young girl. Because that was just my fault on the wrong slide. But you were right. So there's different types of mediation. And depending upon where you are, what culture you're in, the country and such, there are not always all of them occurring. As I mentioned earlier, I usually do facilitative mediation and transformative. In workplaces, I'm trying to get people not just to resolve the conflict, but to get them back to where they might have been before the conflict so that they can move forward into the future and work together. I don't try to make people best friends. I don't try to get them to go out for a cup of tea after work. I try to get them to a point where they're able to work together collaboratively. And there's also evaluative and directive. I haven't done those. When I was in Thailand, that was very, very popular there. A mediator there showed me how they do their type of mediation, and the mediator stands here, and the two parties are here. I keep using you, sorry. The two people are here, and usually what happens in a mediation is both of them talk directly at me and ignore the other person. For my mediations, when they turn and look at each other and start talking, I just kind of pushed my chair back and said, my job is done. Let it go. Let them have the conversation. In Thailand, no, you talk to me. I was sitting there watching, wow, it's just a very different style. How much time do I have?
5 minutes, 6 minutes to be exact.
Okay, I was going to talk about the stages of mediation, but I believe one or two of my colleagues are also going to be talking about mediation, pre-mediation. Yeah? Okay, so I will jump over that. Are you going to talk about the joint mediation session? Joint mediation session?
Yes, entire process I will take in entire process.
Okay. Okay, let's just go right to the end and talk about some of the challenges that mediators will have. And there's quite a few. Getting the people to move from blame to contribution. Most people come in saying it's all her fault. It's all his fault. I am innocent. I did nothing. I did not contribute in any way. So, and I never believe this, by the way. People always contribute in some manner. And sometimes I spend a long time talking to people about how they might have contributed. And I ask all the questions, some of them the right questions, some of them questions that get nowhere, but they're still adamant they did nothing wrong. So, you know what I do? I said, okay, we're not moving forward on this, so this is what I'd like you to do. You've been telling your husband, wife, boyfriend, mother, whoever, about this conflict for the last 2 years. Oh yeah, they know every bit about it. Okay, go home tonight, sit down with them and say, I want an honest answer from you. Can you think of any way that I contributed to this conflict? And 9 out of 10 times, the other person, oh yeah, oh yeah, I could tell you. And they come back the next day and say, okay, I talked, and yeah, you're right, I did contribute. I guess throwing that thing down on the floor right beside the person, hitting him in the foot, probably wasn't a smart thing to do. You couldn't have thought of that one before without somebody telling you. So usually people will catch on after a while. Actively listen. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes if you've heard the story a lot and the person tends, I've had people literally bring in a binder like this, and this was their life over the past 2 years, and they want to go through every page of it. So at some point, I have to admit, I'm going, oh, okay, now what am I going to make for dinner tonight, or whatever. You start to drift. You can't. You have to pull yourself back. And that's being present. That's being aware of yourself. Self-awareness is hugely, hugely important, because if you don't know your own strengths and weaknesses, you're not going to be able to overcome your challenges when you're there as a mediator. Being present, being curious, I mentioned those. Focusing on what the other person is saying. Asking the clarifying questions. Tell me more about that. What happened after that? What happened before that? Getting into the details. And that helps them clarify as well. Summarizing what they've heard. So what I understand, when Priyanka was talking earlier today about neutrality and impartiality, I understood you to mean this and this and this. That's letting them know that they've been heard. Or, if need be, they can help clarify. In a mediation itself, doing this is really important. The reason it's important is a few reasons. One, I'm confirming my understanding. Two, I'm letting the speaker know that they've been heard. And three, maybe the most important, I'm giving the other party the opportunity to hear the same thing again. Because imagine you and somebody are in conflict, and the mediator is there. And I say, okay, I would like you to speak first, and then it will be your turn. So this person is speaking. What do you think the other person is doing? Listening? They should be listening, yes, absolutely. That's exactly what they should be doing. What do you think they're doing? Sorry?
He's also watching how you're treating that person.
And so you have to speak a little louder.
He's also watching that how much importance you're giving to him.
Checking the mediator, checking what they're doing, sure, sure. And if they're doing that, they're probably not listening all that well.
Trying how to rebuttal.
Right on. Figuring out how they're going to reply. It's called thinking with the motor running. Or listening with the motor running. You're listening to the person, but what you're really doing, okay, I have to say this, I'm going to speak next, so I want to say this and this, and you're taking either mental notes or you're writing down things because you're more interested in speaking than listening. Very common. Using body language. We talked about that earlier as well. Minimizing assumptions. That is huge. And that's where self-awareness really comes in as well. If we don't know that we're making assumptions, we're not going to change them. In the 5-day training courses, we have a lot of assumption exercises where people can check out their assumptions and spend time working on their assumptions with a few just very simple stories where people just fall into the assumption trap over and over and over again. So it's actually a lot of fun. And asking open-ended questions. It's easy to ask a closed question. And a closed question will get you a yes or a no or an I don't know. And when people are in conflict, they're not willing to expand if they don't have to. But it's difficult to answer, so what are your expectations today? Yes, no, I don't know. Sure, you can get an I don't know. But the more open-ended questions you ask, the more information you will receive as a mediator, helping you to bring it all together and help them, obviously, resolve their conflict. And one of the other issues that was spoken about earlier was the enforceability of a mediation contract. An MOU,